thank you for setting this up, and appreciate everyone taking a moment. Wanted to provide an opportunity. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges in what we're dealing with, a lot of things that have to be decisions ultimately made. But I wanted to provide an opportunity to answer any questions that any of you may have that I can't answer. There's a lot I probably won't be able to. But wanted to first and foremost wish you all the best relative to your personal safety. Every decision that we're making as an institution, and of course in the athletic department, is built around ensuring that we do what we do with the health and safety of our student athletes, coaches, and staff at the forefront of our responsibility. So just wanted to share that, and then just open it up for questions, Jerry.
All righty. Thank you very much, Gene. And I will remind everyone, stay on mute, please. We got a lot of people on this call until I call on you, and we're going to open it up for questions with Bill Landis from The Athletic with Rob Aller on deck. Bill?
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, Gene. The last time we spoke with you, you said that you had a hard time envisioning playing games without people in the stadium, and I'm wondering, as you've continued to have talks, maybe how your thoughts have evolved relative to that over the last couple of weeks.
Well, thanks, Bill. And obviously, that's still an ongoing conversation. Somebody needs to throw mute.
Yeah, if we could mute our phones, please.
Great, thank you. So obviously that's still a conversation that all of us are having at the Big Ten and across the country. And I struggled with it at the beginning. And as I continue to have conversations, I'm becoming more comfortable with that if that is where we end up, and I'm optimistic that we won't. But if we do end up there, I think we can accommodate it. I think it's still, for me, an interesting challenge to think that we could create an environment where our players who are in contact physically can be safe, but we couldn't come up with a strategy to create a safe environment for X number of fans. So I still struggle with that concept. However, I could get there if that is ultimately what we do. Does that make sense, Bill?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I was just curious about that because it does seem like there have been at least like promising developments that suggest that there could be sports in the fall, but it doesn't seem all that promising that there could be mass gatherings of that nature in the fall still, and I didn't know how each of those things sort of lined up for you.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, to your point, mass gatherings. So mass gatherings as we currently are used to them. So obviously we're fortunate with 100,000 seats in the stadium. So could we implement the current CDC guidelines, the state guidelines around physical distancing, mask requirements, and all those type of things in an outdoor environment and have obviously significantly less fans than what we are used to? I think it's possible. So I just feel like we have the talent and skill and the space capacity to provide an opportunity for a certain number of fans to have access to our particular stadium. And of course, that wouldn't be true across the country because of capacity, but I think we can get there.
Thanks.
Next up, Rob Aller from the Columbus Dispatch with Doug Lesmerises on deck. Rob? Rob, are you there?
Rob, you come off mute, Rob.
All right, we'll move on to Doug Lesmerises from
Hello.
Cleveland.com.
Hello.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Hello. Yeah, they had a *6 thing. They kind of messed it up, Jerry, on the mute. Just I want to check into that. Yeah, Gene, following up on Bill's question, and I know you can't get into total specifics, but if fans are allowed into games, how do you determine who gets in? Students, donors, families? And do you have an estimate of crowd size, what that may be?
So we would obviously have to look at our point system, for example, that we have in place. We do have a diversity and constituency throughout our stadium. So we'd have to make sure that we look at each individual group, faculty, staff, students, donors, varsity O, parents of athletes, all those different constituencies, media. So we have to look at those and come up with some strategies within those groups. Our point system has held the test of time, so that would probably be one. Then, of course, the parents and the guests of our student athletes and coaches would be a high priority. And so we'd come up with a strategy. We haven't nailed that down. We have played a little bit with the social distancing concept, and we know that probably would take us down south of 30,000 fans in the stands, actually closer to 20 to 22. So we've played with that a little bit as a framework to start as we move forward and think about what we ultimately be allowed to do. So yes, we played with a little bit, and of course we played with other scenarios as well.
A quick follow-up. The challenge would be policing all this, obviously. Like, would masks be mandatory, and how do you do that? Other than the ushers have to sort of do that?
Well, we haven't gotten that far, Rob, because we would defer to our experts, and we haven't gone that far. We've just been looking more at operationalizing capacities and ingress and egress, and you can only have so many people in a concourse at a particular time because of the square footage and space and physical distancing requirements. So we haven't gotten to that point around mask in the stands, requirement enforcement, compliance, operationalizing. We haven't gone that deep, but we will have to at some point.
Thank you.
Next up, Doug Lesmerises from Cleveland.com with Tony Girdman on deck. Doug?
Hey, Gene, I know these are kinds of decisions that will come at a conference level, but just you personally, do you believe that whatever happens, all 14 Big Ten teams have to do it together, that if you play, it has to be all 14, and that you need to be under some similar guidelines? And then on a national perspective, do you feel like there needs to be things across the board where most of at least the Power 5 teams are operating in the same environment? Or could you possibly envision a world where maybe some teams aren't ready to play in the fall, but yet other programs go ahead?
Well, the perfect scenario, obviously, is that we have a national solution where there's some consistency. For example, do we just play conference games? And then what is that number? And you would hope that there's a national consistency in that, and that it ties into your postseason to some form of fashion, and the selection criteria for postseason changes and accommodates that national solution. So that is the best scenario. Of course, if you got 12 games, then it's all moot. But I believe that it's best, of course, if we have all 14 schools playing. We haven't discussed that as ADs yet, that if that scenario is not possible, what does that mean? We haven't gone down that path. I personally feel like it could be worked out if someone is disenfranchised for whatever reason. So we should be able to find a way to not penalize all the schools because whatever reason, I can't imagine what it would be. I guess a state decision or whatever. We haven't discussed that as ADs, Doug, but that's certainly something in my view that we should have as much flexibility as we can to make sure that we mitigate the damage to individual schools based upon where they are. I don't know if that answered. Did I get all your questions, Doug? Seems like
you did, and I guess my follow-up is from that, hoping that there would be a national solution. among all the things that you're concerned about, do you believe that would be easy, or do you think that's really complicated and that we know college football is a regional sport in many ways? Do you think this could get messy as you try to move it or hope for national guidance and guidelines?
Yeah, I think it's hard, but we haven't given up on that. We're trying to do that. It's so early, and everything is so speculative right now. But yes, there's an attempt to try and make sure that we have a national solution, that there's consistency, and of course, it'd be easier for us to make sure that we have the safest environment for our student athletes if we just competed against Big Ten schools. We're familiar with locker rooms. We're familiar with the hotels we're going to. We're have familiarity with the travel the operations we have to employ. So those are easier. But can we come up with a national solution where we have standards and protocols where everybody is operates and implements wherever we go? I think it can be done, but it is murky and messy right now because of just everyone trying to get coordinated.
Next up, Tony Girdman from the Ozone with Joey Kaufman on deck. Tony?
Hi, Gene. I know you guys are still working on all of these rules and what-ifs, but have you guys discussed a plan in place or discussed the plan for what happens if the season happens and a player gets sick and comes down with the coronavirus?
No, we haven't. We're really turning that over to our medical experts. It's too early for us to even think about what, as ADs and from a practical point of view, how we would respond. That would be something that we'd get guidance from our medical people from, and we haven't discussed that.
And then what's next on your list of, discussions?
Well, right now we're waiting the NCAA Council vote today. Because we're kind of, I know we're kind of talking about the future, but we're also living in the moment. So we're waiting on the council vote today relative to voluntary or organized team activities and things of that nature. So hopefully by the end of the day or early tomorrow morning, we'll have an answer on their position on what we can do in that space, virtual engagement with current students, recruiting calendar, all those things are being considered today. So hopefully we'll have some answers on that, and then we can focus on the immediate. So the other part that we're discussing is just where we were as ADs. We'll continue to work on scenarios for the future and get feedback from our colleagues across the country with what they're talking about. It's very difficult because every school is in a different state, doesn't have clarity and certainty about their schools and whether they'll be schooled in the fall. So it's very difficult. But the reality is most of us are trying to live in the moment.
Next up, Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch with Austin Ward on deck. Joey? Hit *6, Joey.
Hello?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, sorry. Gene, just with June 8th being the target date for players coming back to campus and being able to use facilities, can you walk us through some of the health and safety protocols they'll be asked to go through, and is COVID testing a part of that?
Yeah, so we're just right now waiting on the vote today and making sure that we can have voluntary workouts. Obviously, it has to be extended, and we hope it's extended to June 30th, and we'll be able to allow access to the Woody Hayes Athletic Complex and the Shoemaker, but we'll have limited access to those facilities. Student athletes have to sign up. They'll go through protocols, not testing, but go through protocols on temperature checks and things of that nature. And then we have all the hygiene and sanitation requirements. And so basically X number of players will work out, 9 or 10, they'll disappear and the room is clean, and then another group will come in and they'll work out, and then the room is clean. And so we think between the two facilities, over a day, we can close to 50 athletes. So we have the signage at our facility that our university has approved. So we're still waiting on the vote today, and then we have one more step with the institution where we're waiting for final approval for access to the Woody Hayes and Shoemaker. So we're waiting for that final approval to occur, and then, of course, the vote today.
And just a quick follow-up on testing. Is that something you guys have looked at, and do you think that is like a step that you guys need to have in the long run?
We'll wait for our medical experts on that. At this point in time, it hasn't been a directive that we have to do that. So we'll wait for our medical experts to give us advice on that.
Thanks.
Next up, Austin Ward from Lettermen Row with Nathan Baird on deck. Austin?
Hey, Gene, thanks for your time. I realize that this is a little bit hypothetical with scheduling and things of that nature, but it sounds at least like you're open to the idea of conference-only play this year. When do you think that some sort of decision for you to put together a schedule for this year has to be made?
Well, I think July, somewhere in early July. I think we need to not rush this, and I know everyone is anxious to do that, but we need to have the opportunity for our medical experts to continue to collect data, see how our human behavior responds in the reopening environment across the country. We can look state by state, but we need to take into consideration not just Ohio, but all other states. And so we need to allow time, which in my view may take all of June. Different schools will make decisions on reopening at different times. So we need to allow that to cascade over time. But I think somewhere in early July, we need to have clarity on what we're doing, because one, we need to think about the student athletes and their families and what their schedule looks like in their world. Then, of course, we need to consider the operational time that needs to be put in place to manage whatever we ultimately do. So I would say early July would be our time frame.
Thanks, Gene.
Next up, Nathan Baird from Cleveland.com with Patrick Murphy on deck. Nathan? Nathan, are you with us? You got that *6? I'll come back to Nathan.
No, I'm here. I'm here if you guys can hear me.
Yep,
sorry.
You're good.
Gene, as far as the June 8th potential return, why is that a preferred option to, I guess, playing it safe and keeping the players, making all the players stay at home and work from there?
Yeah, so a lot of people, for some reason, think that a lot of our players are at home or gone. We have some players who are local, who are here in their apartments, and so it's a mix, to your point. But we feel that the facilities that we have, with the protocols that we can put in place relative to symptom checks and cleanliness and all those type of things, is the best protected environment. Obviously, there's a lot of health clubs and workout places, spas, gyms that will do an excellent job. But some of our young people are not in environments where they have access to those best facilities. They're not. And so we want to provide them the opportunity to have access to the state-of-the-art equipment that we have, but also our medical people, our trainers, and we want to continue. We want to continue to make sure that they're in the safest environment possible. So that's what we feel we can provide. We can provide education, resources, So all of those things that some of them just don't have access to based upon where they are, Nathan. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. And we a lot of talk about this vote today by the NCAA. Are you anticipating that the Big Ten will just fall in line with whatever the NCAA decides today, or the Division I Council votes today, or do you also have to wait until the Big Ten formally chooses not to extend its own moratorium? How does that sort of work at this point?
Yeah, we've already had our position with our representative. We're supportive of extending the date to June 30th, where there's no organized team activities, and that's film and all those type of things. We're very supportive of extending the date to June 30th for voluntary workouts, or actually lifting the prohibition to allow for voluntary workouts in June. So we're supportive of that. So obviously, whatever's voted on, we have to follow. But we're of the opinion that the positions that I just articulated are the best ones.
Thank you.
Next up, Patrick Murphy from 24/7 Sports with Heather Dinich on deck. Patrick?
Thanks, Gene. You talked about the voluntary workouts and what those might look like, but I'm curious from a perspective of teams that are able to work outside. Obviously, the facilities at the WAC, some of your other sports teams do outside practice anyway. How much does that change what you guys are able to do? And will this impact, winter sports that would start working out maybe at some point this summer?
Yeah, so hopefully with football starting, we'll learn some things and make sure that when we ultimately open up for fall sports, who will be the priority at some point in June, hopefully, we'll have learned some things through our facilities, from our staff, and how to operate, and make sure that we can do it in a way that we can handle capacity. We obviously have other gyms in our athletic districts, at the SHOT, at the Cabelli Jennings facility, so we can maybe open those up at some point in time to increase our capacity opportunities. But we want to crawl before we walk and run. And football, of course, makes sense to start with. And we have a process at the institution with the post-pandemic task force that I sit on, and Mike Penner, one of our associates, and Colin Thompson, one of our other associates, sits on. We put together our requests. We send it through the post-pandemic chairs. They edit. And give us the different recommendations, and we modify it and get it approved, and then it goes up the chain and ultimately gets approved, and we still have one more step for the voluntary workout opportunity. So we hope that what we learned by having football in the facility will allow us to come up with a strategy for the other sports down the road, and possibly open up other facilities down the road, but we're not going to rush it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Next up, Heather Dinich from ESPN.com with Dan Hope on deck. Heather?
Hey, Gene, can you hear me?
Yes, I got you, Heather.
Okay. If I heard you correctly earlier, you said you hadn't decided yet what you would do if an athlete tests positive. Is that correct?
That's correct. We our medical experts are talking about that. So we have a Big Ten advisory panel that's chaired by a doctor at Nebraska. Each school has a representative on that task force. Of course, here at our institution and obviously at the other schools, there's medical people who will provide guidance in that space. So at some point, we'll get to that discussion. And that will be a part of, can we play? So we'll get to that discussion, but we aren't at that point right now, and that would not, frankly, be an athletic director's decision, Heather. That will be the people who operate in that space.
I guess I'm wondering, though, if you're talking about bringing athletes back onto your campus as early as June 8th, which I feel like is right around the corner. If I'm a mom and I'm sending my son into your weight room, and I ask you, what are you going to do if he gets sick? What do you say to me? And I don't mean that, please don't, don't take that the wrong way, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. How does that work?
Well, that's a different question. You did the old bait and switch on me. The reality, we were talking about the football season, I thought was the question that was asked originally around a game. So
okay, no, I'm just talking about, like, now, what happens?
You went mom on me. You switched it to the game. Reality is so we have, I'll use this example. So we have 15,000 square feet in the Woody Hayes, and we're going to only have 10 young people in there. And so we feel pretty confident that through our symptoms checks and hygiene implementations, we should be fine. Now, obviously, if someone gets sick, then again, we turn to our medical staff, and they'll give us guidance on what to do next. So it may be that they decide that we should shut it down. So it depends. We have to rely on them, and we go from there.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Next up, Dan Hope from 11 Warriors with Bill Rabinowitz on deck. Dan?
Hey, Gene. Thanks for doing this. You talk about some of the protocols that are in place to limit only, 10 people in the Woody at a time, but obviously there comes a point where to prepare for the season, full teams have to be able to practice together. What do you view as the things that, need to happen between now and then for it to be safe for, full teams to practice together and ultimately play games?
Yeah, I think, this is the challenge of this particular moment in time, Dan, having this conversation. But I think between now and then, we have to get some guidance from our advisory group at the Big Ten, get some guidance from our local experts on what we need to do. Obviously, football players can't practice with masks. They can't social distance. How do we operate the locker room? So all those type of things have to be worked out, and but we would rely on our medical people to give us some guidance on that. So we haven't gotten that granular yet. We will, but we haven't gotten that granular yet on those topics.
You've talked about a 6-week return to play in the past. Is that around the time frame that you think teams need to be able to have those, full team practices in order to start the season on time?
Yeah, that's the best case scenario. So, and actually, I guess you can call it a 7-week, because the first week, the first part, and this gets into the part of one of the questions earlier about, if you're going to start your normal time and have your first game, say September 5th, you need some time to help the student athletes transition, get physicals. If you want to test them, they all got to get tested and just get reacclimated. And then you need a couple weeks. Just keep in mind, we won't have the intense workouts that they've had in the spring, and even the voluntary workouts that they have in June won't be as intense as they historically have been, because typically those are group high intense workouts, and so we got to be careful with the muscle tissue injuries and things of that nature. So I would say that our best case scenario is to have that 6-week preparation opportunity prior to the first game. Can it slide? No question about it. You could slide it to 5 weeks or 4 weeks. It's just what you do in that time frame. But the best case scenario, basically from our medical experts and trainers and strength coaches, is the 6-week window.
Thank you, Gene.
Next up, Bill Rabinowitz from the Columbus Dispatch with Dennis Dodd on deck. Bill?
Hi, Gene. This is a question just about your comfort level with just playing the sport. Obviously, football is a sport played in close quarters, 22 players, collisions and contact on every play. What's your level of comfort that just the game itself is safe, given that there's obviously no vaccine and no real treatment for coronavirus?
I'm not 100% comfortable yet, Bill. That's one of the things that this process is. You constantly get educated around the virus, around the disease. You constantly get educated around different tactics that you can employ from a safety point of view. We continue to learn different things from different countries and obviously across this country. So I am hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic that I'm going to reach a 100% comfort level, but I'm not there yet. Just like I'm not there 100% with fans in the stands. I think we have to be sensitive to the fact that our medical experts, not athletic directors or commissioners or anybody else, have to give us the proper environment and operations in that environment that will allow us to play the game. And we haven't had that in-depth conversation yet. And frankly, it's a little early because we still are studying the virus.
You talk about having obviously a fraction of the normal number of fans in the stands, and that's the best case scenario. That obviously will have a major financial hit given how much ticket revenue brings in. What kind of discussions have you had inside the athletic department about cuts in teams, personnel, salary, any kind of austerity measures?
Yeah, we have some cost containment measures we've been discussing internally, and have to compliment all of our coaches and unit managers and everyone that's been looking at cost reductions in their operating budgets. And I think as we get closer to what reality might be, we'll get more focused on what we have to do there. But at this point in time, we haven't gone to that level of depth that most people think we would, but we're prepared to go to that level based upon what decisions are ultimately made.
And you take so much pride in having 36 sports. Has there been any discussion about possibly having to eliminate any sport?
We haven't gone to that level of depth, but of course, those discussions have occurred, but we haven't gone to that level of depth, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Next up, Dennis Dodd from CBS Interactive with Adam Jardy on deck. Dennis?
Gene, just a point of order. If the vote goes through today, you plan to bring back players on June 8th, correct?
Yeah, we planned June 8th, and some players have leases with
right.
apartments, some don't. So some will come back after June 8th. Some are already here. So
right.
So it'll be staggered, Dennis. It won't be like everybody's here and they're going to start working out June 8th.
Okay, the way it was reported, it was like, well, Ohio State's going June 8th no matter what. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I didn't report that, though.
Okay, all right. And also, the last time you did one of these, and thanks for doing it again, we were talking about the whole season without fans and the impact that would be. How did we get from that point to now considering, hey, maybe we can have a few thousand fans in the stadium?
Well, I think it's learning, Dennis. This is a process. It's a process. Having what was beautiful for me is every morning we have Big Ten athletic directors calls. For the last 4, maybe 5 weeks, we've been having every Thursday calls with our football coaches and athletic directors. We canceled the one for this Thursday just because of the weekend coming. But just the feedback between one another, then talking with other colleagues nationally. I've had great conversations with Joe Castiglione, Chris Del Conte, Greg Burns, and so just constant conversations. And so at the beginning, none of us, everybody was, really speculative. None of us had a position on anything. Now I've shifted to being curious. on a lot of things that I never thought I would consider. And so it's an educational process.
And also, one in here, you mentioned something about masks. Do you believe players can play with masks if required?
No, I think that's unrealistic. I think if somebody tells us that has to happen, in my view, based upon what I've learned, we won't be playing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Next up, Adam Jardy with the Columbus Dispatch with Spencer Holbrook on deck. Adam?
Hi, Gene. Thanks for the time today. Obviously, we're spending a lot of time talking about fall sports because that's next on the priority list or on the timeline. But are you getting any feel for like what all of these discussions what implications these could have for winter sports and what it might be like trying to get some of those seasons underway?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. Yeah, I've thought about it a little bit, have some conversations with my internal team, not my AD colleagues. But, let's imagine we can't play football. And that is because, we decided that the university's not going to open. We won't have classes on campus and whatever takes us to that decision. That doesn't mean we can't play our winter sports beginning in January. Because we may, the circumstances may be different. Students might be in school in the second semester as opposed to the first semester. I have no clue what the decision will be. So I think that there's a possibility, to your point, that you could play. I think we have 8 or 9. I forgot how many home men's basketball games, for example, in November and December. But you can certainly play the rest in January and February. Of course, you can wrestle. Of course, you can, the other sports, gymnastics, and so on and so forth. But it would certainly depend, going back to Bill's question on finances, some of the sports it would depend upon financial opportunities or that are available or not. Basketball you probably play because it has the opportunity to generate revenue and you can afford it. But those are the conversations, yes, Adam, that we've had internally, but have not discussed that with my AD colleagues or nationally at all.
And some schools have been discussing like moving up the academic calendar, sending students home after Thanksgiving. That seems like it could have an impact as well on winter sports as far as just not having kids on campus. What is that something that in your talks, is that something Ohio State has considered, and how could something like that impact the start of a season as well?
Yeah, I can't speak to what the academic side of the house has discussed yet, but obviously we would adjust athletically to whatever parameters that occur. If you had that scenario, we could probably figure out how to make it happen as long as there's classes, as long as there's in-person classes. So we could probably figure it out.
Thank you.
Next up, Spencer Holbrook from Lettermen Row with James Crapia on deck. Spencer?
Hey, Gene. Thanks for doing this. I just was wondering, when you have players coming back to campus on June 8th, if that is able to be the case, and there's players from out of state who voluntarily would like to come back and work out, what is the process like for them? Is that a self-isolation before they're allowed in? Is there a procedure that you guys are going to follow, and are there guidelines as far as out-of-state guys who would voluntarily choose to come back to campus?
Yeah, they'll go through symptom checks, and based upon what our doctors say, they will either have to self-quarantine for a period of time or not. The governor's lifted the 14-day quarantine, I believe. It depends on their individual circumstance. Hopefully that answers your question. Someone, may have a condition that requires them to quarantine for a period of time. So it just depends on what their physical shares with our doctors.
Thank you.
Great. Next up, James Crapia from the Oregonian with Tim May on deck. James?
Gene, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Rob Mullen said on Friday he's spoken with you, and I know you obviously have a pre-existing relationship with the College Football Playoff Committee and whatnot. What are your thoughts on the possibility of flipping sites for the Oregon series, given that
Governor DeWine seems more keen on sports being played in Ohio than Oregon's governor appears right now, and 20 to 22,000 at Ohio Stadium is far more than Oregon could fit at Autzen under the current distancing guidelines.
Oh, wow, that's a great question. We just played both of them here 2 years in a row. But, Rob and I did not talk about that. I called him, I think, maybe 2 days after the governor's announcement just to see if I can get clarity. And obviously, that position has been changed or at least walked back on to some degree. So we did not talk about that scenario. I would imagine it's the first time I thought about it, so I'm not so sure I had a strong opinion on it because we would be probably giving up a game next year in 22, which would make it harder for us, and in 21, that would make it harder for us. So I'm not so sure I would do that. I'm not so sure I'd flip that because we give up. We wouldn't have 7 home games next year just off the cuff.
Then as a follow, Gene, as an AD who's both a payee and a payor in the September non-conference game market, under any of the many scenarios of possible football scheduling changes or delays, do you feel that force majeure would suffice if conference games are still played? Because clearly you folks are still expecting to receive $300,000 from Oregon, and Bowling Green and Buffalo are budgeting to receive payments from you folks.
Well, there you go. I'd have to defer to legal on that one. I'm hopeful that we can play 12 games because I certainly, having come from Eastern Michigan and know how that world works, I want to play those games not just for us but for those schools because I know how the dire straits that they're in. So hopefully we can get to that. But yes. We have to look at that clause in the contract if we get to that point. I don't know. I'd have to defer to legal on its viability of standing up.
Thank you.
And we're going to wrap up our call today with questions from Tim May from Lettermen Row. Tim?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Gene. I was just wondering, number one, are you keeping notes so you can write a textbook about all this when it's all said and done?
Yeah, of course I am, Tim. I forgot what chapter I'm on.
Yeah, it might be good reading. Well, hey, what would satisfy you as being a viable football season from a length standpoint, not necessarily counting a conference championship game type situation, but is 10 games and 11 games or 12? I know right now you probably still got in your mind 12, but you have to be thinking contingencies. What do you think would be a satisfactory football season length?
Well, first, you obviously, like you said, you want to play the full schedule, and not just for us. And we're just talking about Bowling Green and Buffalo and its impact. I think is significant for us to be able to try and do that. Then, secondly, I guess I would lean to a conference schedule of 9 or 10 games if we could work that out. I could probably be comfortable with 8, which would be challenging, but I would feel better with 10, so you can do 5 away, 5 at home. Our kids want to play, and so it's hard for me to say 8 games wouldn't be important to them, but I think it would be. And so there's a few young men who this is their last opportunity, and so I want to make sure that we, with first and foremost with their health and safety in mind, whatever we can do to give them that chance, I want to bend over backwards to give them that chance. And so, for me to say it's 8, 9, or 10 or 12, I would first and foremost probably end up talking to our kids and say, hey, here's where we are. What do you think? Because I want to give them a chance.
Yeah. How maddening is it, though, right now for you? I mean, you guys are having, like you said, you're meeting every day, every week, all the time on this, yet there's still no definitive, endpoints or green light point, on this. How maddening is it to go to bed every night with all these things floating through your brain?
Well, it's interesting. because we've gotten to a point where a lot of your questions that you guys have asked and aren't really where we're focused yet. Because we've been focused on the moment, and we were focused on NCAA legislation around virtual meetings and virtual workouts and the transfer issues and the NIL and now the Austin case. And so we've been focused on what we can focus on and hopefully get a decision on. Right now, we can't make a whole lot of decisions until, and I think we're starting to see it. I think Notre Dame just announced that they're going to have school. I think you'll see decisions made that will sequence over time where we can have some clarity and say, okay, all right, now let's make a decision based upon these facts that we have in front of us. Because everything we're talking about right today is speculative, which is fine, but it's hard to make quantifiable in-game decisions until these other decisions are made.
Yeah, one last quickie, Gene. How much, like you talked about, when the reporter from Oregon asked you a while ago about, the situation with that game and the possibility of, but you brought basically the word contracts with these teams, but also, you guys have contracts with television networks and stuff, and I don't know, how much is all of that weighing on maybe satisfying what's expected, with what may be reality?
Well, first again, that all those things, are secondary compared to the health and safety issue. And so, if we can't play the game, and a couple questions earlier about this, if we can't put the kids in a position to play in a safe way, then all that other stuff is moot. And so if we are able to do that, then, television is satisfied because the game will be played and they can televise. But then it gets to, can we make sure the fans? So there's a sequencing of things, and the contractual obligations, all are dependent upon the ability to play the game in a safe way for our student athletes. And after that, everything just rolls from there.
You've been as adamant about the safety for the players, the student athletes, the kids, from the get-go as maybe anybody. What was the eye-opening moment or maybe sequence of things that told you how serious this COVID-19 thing was? And, what kind of has to be satisfied in your mind before you do give the green light?
Well, I mean, it's just the same for me as it is for all of you or for anyone else that's watched this thing. It's, people are losing their lives, and that's just unsettling. And so for us to, not be touched by that, I just don't, I wouldn't understand that. So to me, one, that's that. And then two, you look at what we're asking their doctors and first do, in the environment that they're in. I certainly wouldn't want to have an event where we're putting people in a situation where we're going to stress our medical system because we weren't being responsible. So I just think I think we got to be as thoughtful about the human part of this whole thing. First and foremost, it's just who I am. It's just the way I operate.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Lettermen Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.